But I've been asked, and I actually thank Maury for giving me the opportunity to choose the topic. And what I chose to do is faith-filled leadership in the church today. And it allowed me to reflect back on a conference that we had as bishops on leadership. So I'm going to talk about leadership, especially of bishops. But also I think it would be leadership that would be of parish priests, as pastors, any lay people who are serving the God. Obviously, as laity, your vocation as the Second Vatican Council enforces to bring Christ to the world. And but you need to be inspired, guided, and I would say supported by bishops and certainly by pastors and priests. The longer I'm a bishop, the more I'm convinced that when I look at dioceses, when I look at religious orders, schools, they fail and become weak for three reasons. The first is the leader is someone who is scared. And we saw how often that happened in the cancel culture. You said something truthful, and suddenly you became targeted for that. Now just think of all the embracing the DEI movement going forward. You see this still. Now corporations are walking away from it. I had a conversation with the lay leadership of a Catholic school and a Catholic high school, and they were describing me, this is a couple of years now, they were describing their DEI program. Does everyone know when I say DEI what that is?
Yeah.
Okay. And I said, this looks like the public school. Well, you know, and I said, you can base your teaching and your formation on why prejudice is a sin on two fundamental principles. We're created in God's image and likeness, and we're beloved sons and daughters of God. Anything else you're doing comes from the public school. And I said, sooner or later, if you don't like, they're going to turn on you because you are a straight white male and you could become a target. And I said, well, where's this coming from? Well, we hired this teacher, and this teacher was, she came from Southern California, and I go, where did she study? No surprise, this is what it is. Where does she teach? I found out the school. And I said, no, you are not a racist institution. You may try to be elite, but you can't be. It's Spokane, Washington. So let's be, let's be a little bit humble here. So anyway, fear. You saw this, in the church. All of a sudden, behavior of certain leaders of the church, bishops, modeled the secular environment. And so you look at, and then you see what happened in religious orders or Catholic hospitals, higher education, schools, weak leadership. They were afraid of not being popular. They were afraid of, again, being canceled, not being invited to social gatherings. Fear. The second flawed leadership is the compromiser. We have to go along to get along. And as chair of, I'm winding down my time as chair of Catholic education. It's been a great 3-year term. And I work closely with Mary Pat Donahue, who is the executive director at the Bishops' Conference. She has great experience. She was a teacher. She turned around a Catholic school, St. Jerome's in Hyattsville, Maryland. They went to a classical model. The school's double its size. She's just tremendous to work with. And during those period of time, I had to address as chair wokeism and the gender questions and all this compromising of church mission. It wasn't always popular in the interviews that I gave. So I would say the second way leadership is weak is the person who wants to guide, the bishop who wants to compromise. So you see the watering down of the mission of a school, for example. I remember reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was by a non-Catholic layman who had sent his daughters to a Catholic girls' school in the Northwest. And he said, he got the alumni information back, and they were to be agents of social change. And it was all this kind of thing. And he said, I wanted my daughters to come out saying they had a closer relationship with Jesus Christ, Jesus was their Savior, and how might they bring Christ to the world, which would include, of course, care for the poor and helping people and everything else. Instead, it said I felt I was reading the mission statement of a secular social justice operation or social work operation. So you have the great compromises. The third is, and I want to scandalize you here, but why do we sometimes have weak leadership? Because in this case, I'm talking about bishops. The men don't believe. I don't want to scandalize you about that, but you think of the 12 apostles, there was Judas, who did not believe in Jesus as Son of God, as Messiah. And I think sometimes we saw this on the opposition. Any of you, did you go to the Eucharistic Congress? Okay. Some of you. It was outstanding. In my 37 years of being a priest and my 13 years as bishop, the three most significant experiences of my life in the United States was Pope John Paul's visit in 1987. He went to Florida, he went to the West Coast, and I was just ordained a priest and was able to meet him along, because we were just talking about this a couple days ago. I had the privilege of driving bishops, and I was just ordained, and of course John Paul came to San Francisco, and he has a big scene blessing the Golden Gate Bridge, and had a massive Candlestick Park, and we called that moment Hooray for Catholicism. It was like the heyday of Catholic San Francisco. And the second was when the Pope John Paul came in '93 to Denver for World Youth Day, which again touched a lot of people's lives for vocations. And I was just finished a year teaching. I went with students and two coaches, and it was a great experience. And then the Eucharistic Congress. The Eucharistic Congress was an example, an outpouring of grace where our focus was on Jesus Christ. The unity was in Christ in the Eucharist. And too often, we get divided as a church along ethnic lines or ecclesiologies. And this was not. We were focused on Jesus Christ. But there was some opposition in the planning of that. And some of the bishops they were against it. Now, why? I don't know. So, why sometimes do we have problems with leadership in the church again? Those who are fearful, those who want to compromise, and those who don't believe. So what essentially then, my experience, is faith-filled leadership in the church today? Well, the first is very much that the priest, the bishop, and again I'm speaking as bishops, has to strive for holiness. Now you would think that is obvious, but it's not always. How do we grow in holiness? Not just clergy and religious, but laity. 3 areas. This is from my work I found with seminaries. Number one, humanity. We have to accept our humanity. I was giving a retreat to the faculty actually back at Marine Catholic last month. And I said, humanity is such, there are basic things that get men into trouble. Greed, lust, and ambition. Now I was told when I was giving a retreat, the women said, well, women are different. You might want to slip in, and ladies don't get angry with you. You might want to slip jealousy in there and drop one of those. And I thought, all right, well, but so you have to accept that. Our humanity. We can't be like the Jansenists. Now, Jansenists was a heresy of the church that said the body was dirty. Vincent de Paul, of course, in the 1600s, was very clear. No, that is not true. We are not, as Martin Luther said, the snow-covered dunghill. No, there's goodness. Why? We're beloved sons and daughters of God. We're creating God's image and likeness. So, striving for holiness, accept our humanity. The second is humility. Now, those of you who've heard me talk before, I often speak on humility. Now, humility reflects my upbringing. Not certainly my mom pushed this constantly and lived it, but because I was taught by the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, the De La Salle Christian Brothers, I did go to a Jesuit university, and then I had the Sulpicians in the seminary. So some of you, I know Maury's son, Father Ratriste, those who went to theological college in Washington, D.C. are the Sulpicians. It's the French school of spirituality, which is very much emphasizing humility, our Blessed Mother, trust in God's providence. Why is humility so essential? Because humility is truth. The truth is we're never as great as we think we are, but we're never as bad as others may say we are. And again, you've heard me use the line of my uncle about my brother Pat. I like to buy you for what you're worth and sell you for what you think you're worth. And I think that is what humility is. Humility is the recognition, and again, a great quote of Vincent de Paul, since the devil does not employ humility, he does not know how to fight. So if you and I want to be holy, we have to be humble. And that is recognizing that God has created us, that yes, we may have temptations, we may have struggles, but Jesus is a merciful Savior. So again, the path to holiness, humanity, humility, and humor. Now, too often you have well-intentioned priests, and I suppose bishops, who go around with what the Italians might call, and I might be mispronouncing, you may have heard this, the muzzolini, the long face. But the Irish have a more descriptive, we all get. It's called the vomit face. So, and I remember when I was a priest, that the priests we were in a prayer group, and Jim Keene was my first pastor, Monsignor Keene, Jim Keene was a great guy and a very humble guy. He had spent most of his priesthood prior to being a pastor as a teacher. And I taught actually in the two places that he had been assigned. Mike Keene and Kevin Gaffey were cousins. Again, coming out of the great Catholic San Francisco. They were both in the same parish, St. Paul's, which generated all sorts of vocations. And Gaffey's father was police chief of San Francisco. So it's interesting. Daly was a police chief, and he had two sons that were Jesuits, and Mike Gaffey was the police chief. And anyway, we used to talk about, oh yeah, what happened to him? Shut up, he had the vomit face, you know. So there's always, but there has to be joy. And sometimes Francis talks about this, you know, the joy, but there is joy. Life can be very difficult, but Jesus said, I will be with you to the end of the age. And that's his promise in the Eucharist, in word, in sacrament, in us. So you want to grow in holiness, keep your sense of humor. And don't take yourself so seriously. And I see this a couple of times, these priests that I know very well in California. I go, can you radiate the glory of the resurrection? Now, I've had very difficult assignments in my life. It never took from the joy I had in priesthood. In fact, that's why Into Your Hands, Lord, was so significant. So a priest must strive and bishop to be holy, and that's the path to holiness. And of course, that includes prayer. Now, we could always do better in prayer. I could do everything. But I find the most important part of my day is in my chapel in the residence of my home. I live in a very quiet neighborhood, which is great. And I was comparing that. I was in a rectory in Boston for a few days because I have a classmate there, and South Boston's a great parish, tremendous parish, big school and everything else. But the noise, I had forgotten, between the sirens and the buses that stopped right outside my window, announcing over recording the stop, you know, and I forgot how quiet it is. So, but to spend time in quiet prayer, listening to the Lord. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. Not listen, Lord, your servant's speaking. You know, there's a difference. So the quiet time there. So a bishop must strive for holiness. Then, of course, the office, the regular retreats. We do our retreat here. When I first was the bishop of Spokane, we went 2 years to Palisades over in Seattle. And beautiful retreat house. I was telling Sean, my seminarian here from our diocese, that we went on retreat, and Bishop Carey, you know Bishop Carey's a baker? Liam Carey's a great guy. So Liam decides to go out. Now we're in Federal Way, and he's going to go out and get a cup of coffee. and he has to go down the road, and there's one of those just drive-through cup of coffees. Just, I don't think there's anything around it. So he gets in between cars, because he's not out of a car, and he's walking, he gets his cup of coffee, and not to scandalize you, but the Irish have this great phrase, he fell ass over tea kettle. He slipped, and the coffee spilled, and he was on the ground, and cars, no one will help him. So cars are inching by him, looking out the window. So it was an isolated area, and then, so we did it 2 years, and then the guys, it's too cold here. So they decide we're going to go to, we're going down to Cabo San Lucas. And I said, are you going? I remember Bishop Skillstead, and oh no, what would Pope Francis, because we were staying in the villa owned by an attorney. There's a villa next door. He goes, are you going? I said, no, I'm not going to go. Is it because Pope Francis? I said, no, it's not about that at all. I said, I don't want to see Bishop Tyson running around in a Speedo outside of the village. No, I said that to Joe here a couple of years ago, so it's not like he's going to be scandalized by that, which is not true. He was not. But I said, I don't like vacations pretending to be diocesan business. And my own priest will say, why can't we go to a resort and have our study days? I said, go on vacation yourself. So then, then COVID hit. No, we all were ordered in 19 to go to Mundelein because Pope Francis, after the Carrick thing, we all had to go there, which was all right. And then we didn't know what to do. So then in 2020, once again, we're going to go to Siena because we had the ad limina with the Pope. Bishop Daly, are you going to Siena? No, I'm not going. Why? It's a vacation. Well, they all go to Siena, you know, and they had a great Dominican lead it. Well, I have confirmation, and confirmation at St. Aloysius is always right before the start of Lent. So I did have a pastoral excuse, but I would not have gone. Well, they all get ready to go, and then Archbishop Burnett dies in Seattle, and they have Archbishop Sarton, by then had no longer been Archbishop. Sarton had come home, Ancient had to come home, and then COVID hits, and they can barely get out of Italy. And so then the next year, what do? The retreat house wasn't going to take us in Seattle, and then Mount Angel opened up. And we've been here ever since. And it's a great place. The importance about, and the food is great, they're very hospitable, tremendous. But I say that a bishop striving for, there has to be prayer, there has to be retreats. Now you as lay people wanting to grow in holiness, if you can do a retreat, an overnight, a day of recollection, all of those are very important. And why is, very simply, Jesus, before every major decision, prayed. And he's the Son of God. So a bishop, effective leadership has to be one of holiness, striving for that. Number two, a bishop has to promote and defend the faith. You would think that would be obvious, but you have to. And this is not an easy time for that. There is, in dioceses, sometimes the greatest burden of a bishop is the an institution of higher learning, a Catholic, which ends up compromising so much. And so we have to teach the truth with charity. Now sometimes people want the bishop to come in essentially with a flamethrower and scorch the earth. That doesn't work. It won't work. And in fact, as chair of education, sometimes people would call Washington, the bishops' conference, and they would, of course, they think I work there. They don't pay attention that I actually have a diocese to lead. And yes, we like to speak with, I get the Bishop Daly, we like to speak to him. Why? Well, I have children at this Catholic high school, and you wouldn't believe what they're being taught, and I like Bishop Daly to come and visit the school. Well, I don't think Bishop has the time to go to Atlanta to see this, or wherever the town was, but you know, you have to teach the truth with charity. And some people don't like the truth. Do you remember a few years back, it was, I think, we did not meet as bishops in the summertime. So I want to think it was summer of it was either 20 or whatever it was, we were discussing the letter on the Eucharist. And this letter on the Eucharist was very important because it had to do with essentially pro-abortion politicians. And there was a movement of certain bishops to stop it. And Archbishop Gomez is a great man, and he was chairing, and we were doing it by Zoom. And the thought was, oh, we can't vote on this because we won't allow the bishops to speak. And as only Archbishop Gomez and his humility said, well, no, actually Zoom will allow us all to speak. It may take us longer, but we're just going to line up for it. And so that's what we did. And there were 3 things said by 3 bishops why we should not have a letter. Number 1, it will affect unity, because some of the bishops are against this. Number 2, it will affect credibility. And number 3, it will affect dialogue. So I was getting texts from some of the bishops across the country that I know are very good men. They said, Tom, are you going to speak? So I got in line to speak, and I addressed all 3. And I won't tell you which 3 said these things. I said, there cannot be unity without truth. And the truth is the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. And they're very clear that when you fundamentally are advocating positions contrary to what the church is, you really have to step back, especially in the life issues, which continue to be the preeminent issue of the church, the life issues about the sanctity of the unborn, why abortion is wrong, euthanasia. All of those things are connected with this. And so you can't have unity without truth. Credibility, I said the credibility of the Bishops' Conference and bishops has suffered greatly over the McCarrick thing. Because we never did find out where he got his money, who received his money, and who owes their position in the church today to his influence. So much for credibility. And then I said dialogue. I said, I remember when I was a priest, the Archbishop read an article about an interview that Tom Brokaw did on the NBC News with a certain elected official in the West who prides oneself in being a big Catholic. The Archbishop at the time was Niederauer, and he remembers the interview. And I watched online. Tom Brokaw asks the elected official, well, you're a Catholic. If the president gets elected in the way, which was Obama, and you have a voice, what will you tell him about abortion? And the politician said, well, the church is not clear on when life begins, as St. Augustine said. Now remember, if you can't even pronounce it Augustine, Augustine, you know, is a grass. It's a grass and that use on golf course, whatever it is. But he said, I think the church is, Brokaw says to the politician, I think the church is pretty clear, and I'm not a Catholic, life begins at conception. So I said, now that was '08, because I remember the Archbishop telling me this when I met with him as vocation director. Now we're discussing this, that's right, it was 2021. 13 years later, I said, so much for dialogue. So again, a bishop has to promote and defend authentic church teaching, always with charity. Because, again, for your own reflection, you may have heard me say this before, read the 4th Eucharistic prayer in the Missal. Because I use it often, but it cannot have its preface separated from the body of the prayer. Now, all of the Eucharistic prayers you choose, like common, one for Sundays, saints, whatever it is. But 4 are united. But there's a great line that always struck me teaching school and teaching, like I have to, next week, speak to a group of young adults. The line from the Eucharistic prayer is, all who seek you with a sincere heart and all those whose faith is known to you alone. That's all that Jesus ever asked, that we will seek him with a sincere heart. So when a bishop preaches and teaches authentic faith, it has to be with charity, knowing that, God willing, we're all seeking the Lord with a sincere heart. Sometimes a pastor will come in, and I serve as a bishop, and he wants to blow things up. You know, a bishop comes to a diocese, he wants to move everybody. And this was described by one bishop to me. It's kind of like the dog who wants to wet in all the corners so you can kind of control everything. Now, I don't like to, I'm going to have to move. I told the priest of the diocese at our study day a couple of weeks ago, I said, no, I don't like to move, guys. If you're happy and the people are happy, that provides the parish's home. But sometimes I have to move, and I'm going to make some moves this summer just because we had one priest, Father Sean Thompson, who was on the Indian reservation. As you know, he's up on a ladder fixing a heater thing. The thing came down, he fell back, hit his head. He's been in intensive care for the last month at Sacred Heart. He was just moved to a facility. He'll never recover full enough to take on pastoral responsibilities, but he was well loved in the parish of the 4 that he had. But anyway, I say I will only move someone or remove them on 3 areas: heresy, immoral behavior, and theft. Beyond that, just because you don't like the songs that are sung when you enter the place does not mean you blow the whole parish up. And sometimes guys will come in and do that. Bishops, make all of it. The big one is to move people. So, again, I say that is leadership has to be clear, but it also has to be compassionate. And but sometimes you have to be very firm, and I've had to be very firm on certain issues, and that's all there is to it. When I was appointed, the nuncio said to me, don't let humility and kindness be mistaken for weakness. Yeah. So the third area is a bishop has to be committed. Now, they're not necessarily in this order. Number 3, committed to Catholic education. Now, that was very natural for me because I went to Catholic school my entire life, spent the bulk of my priesthood, was sent for studies and that. But we know that schools, when they are not faithful to the mission, can do more harm than good. And we've seen this, where a kid comes out. I remember from my own experience teaching, there was a religion teacher at the school who was an ex-sister who was reading tarot cards in religion class. And she taught this philosophy class, and we were unionized. The high schools in the Archdiocese of San Francisco are the only ones, I think, west of Philadelphia that were unionized. And she was a heretic, essentially, but popular. And I remember students who were seniors when I was first year, they're freshmen, had her class. They were at a 10-year reunion. They said, it was a great class. It didn't do anything for my Catholic faith. Then why are we operating this school if it doesn't do anything to strengthen your faith in Jesus Christ? So a bishop has to be committed to schools, to solid schools. You cannot take your eyes off the schools. When they work, you can't replace them. But when they go astray, they give pastors heart attacks, they scandalize the lay faithful, and they lead people astray. And we've seen what happened in that crazy period of time. Just read mission statements sometimes. And that was when I was getting ready to speak a couple years ago, and I started reading mission statements on the very exclusive Catholic schools of the East. They were horrific. Nothing about Jesus Christ. I got a text on the plane last night from a former student. He said, I hear they're changing the mascot of Marin Catholic, which was the Wildcats, to the fishermen. I said, that's not true. So I texted the priest who's there now. And he said, no, Duc Altum is the motto for the school, put out into the deep. A reference to Luke's gospel, a reference to John Paul's thing. But I saw what happened. Certain individuals, alumni and former teachers, don't like the school's clarification of its Catholic mission. So they're telling all these stories. The fishermen. There's never been a motto. There's the banana slugs, which is UC Santa Cruz. But I thought that's not true. But the schools have to be solid, and when they are, they work. Pope John Paul came out with Ex Corde Ecclesia at the heart of the church. It was meant to make sure that Catholic universities are teaching what they should do. It failed miserably in the United States because, quite frankly, the presidents got together, priests at the time, and undermined all of it. As if to say you can't both be faithful to the church's mission and teach authentic, and teach a pluralistic society. I remember a group of students, 40 students went to see a Jesuit who was in charge of mission at the time, this is in 2018, to talk about what they feel the school failed them. And he said to me, I fully expected this to be extreme right-wing nuts. And they were faithful Catholic kids who said, our parents made sacrifices to send us here. We chose to go here rather than state school. And we feel you did more for non-Catholics than you did for Catholics. And that's not unique just to Gonzaga. It's what we've heard in many places. So a bishop who's expressing leadership has to make sure his schools are what they're about. It's easier to turn a diocese with 13 grade schools around than it is a big archdiocese that has 150 schools. So commitment to Catholic education is very essential. Another quality of faithful leadership is the bishop has to strengthen the Catholic family. Now, you know this better than I do as parents and grandparents, the challenges that families have. And we underestimated the strength of a Christian culture. Have you ever read that book, From Christendom to Apostolic Age by Monsignor Shea? And he has another one out that addresses that. It's so important. Family life. You know, mom and dads are both working. I think one of the biggest threats to family life has been the explosion of social media and technology, the phone. You've placed within essentially the lives of children, young children, something that can be a pathway to evil and to destruction. If the phone was basically the phone we used to have on an OnStar and the GPS, we'd be fine. But it becomes a distraction. And I've often thought, one of the great things I've loved about being the Bishop of Spokane, Eastern Washington, and again, you may have heard me use this before, is that I contrast that with the time in San Jose, the Silicon Valley. In rural America, rural dioceses, you're much more aware of God's presence. Why is that? Because you need the weather, the rain and the sun for the crops. It requires patience to see the crops grow. And crops, when they're harvested, provide for food, which meets a need as opposed to a want. In Silicon Valley, faster is better. No, it's not. We become the creator, not God, because we are these great tech people. And really, in all said and done, most of technology is more of a want than a need. So all of those images and parables that Jesus used about farming have a very timeless quality. And that's why I think young people today are so drawn to Eucharistic adoration, because there's a grace they receive when they are quiet with the Lord. We that are older didn't, and we're not constantly bombarded by noise. There was one phone, as you recall. You know, someone called the house, you had to pick it up and answer it. And if you weren't home, the answering machine was probably the best invention. But now, of course, kids have phones. And I was just meeting with someone, they were telling me, it was a couple from California, Jack and Sue, and we met each other in Boston and Maine, and they were talking about their granddaughter. Someone in the class got a phone already, you know, at the age of 9. So, you know, you see this. I got something great. Bob and Mary Basso, great friends. Bob, chair of the board. Bob just sent something. Evidently, there's a new app or something that will not allow anything photographing of nudity. So they believe that this finally can be placed on phones as a way to prevent young people from being distracted and harmed by the horrors of what that happens. So back to the Catholic family. How do we support you as the Catholic family? Well, the bishop has to, I think, make sure, again, the parishes are, God willing, staffed and meeting your needs, supporting you in what you're trying to do. Because, you know, Our Lady of Fatima One of the messages of Fatima is the last thing the devil will do is attack the family. And think about that, on the gender issue, on same-sex marriage, all of those issues that we thought was just a given. When you can't answer what is a woman, I mean, that there's something off there. And someone said, are you going to have a vicar for this? And I said, if I have the money, a little bit more money, I will establish an office of family life to help families. And it's so important. So a bishop must work to strengthen the Catholic family. Another, I think, part of leadership of bishops is fostering of vocations. Now, I just think, to me, it's always been, and that's the great gratitude I have from being the Serra Episcopal advisor for Serra USA, along with Cardinal Collins for Serra International. Vocations, when I came to the diocese, we had 3 seminarians. And we added quickly a 4th. And now we have 15. And we only have, I think, 42 active priests. So percentage-wise, we're doing well. Smaller dioceses are easier to turn around. They're kind of like, versus the ocean line of big archdioceses. The only difficulty is sometimes smaller dioceses can be more like a speedboat. You can flip them easily. And whereas the ocean line of the big archdioceses take a lot more time. But family life and vocations are connected. What comes first? Holy vocations coming from holy families. But we know that many of our seminarians come from families that divorce, they've come back to the faith, and that's the reality. Not everybody comes from an intact family, although we're blessed that we have 3 seminarians from DeSales, which is our high school in Walla Walla, that has about 100 students in it. And we're blessed with that. So opportunities for prayer. You've heard me say this before, the 6th decade of the Rosary comes from Lourdes. Now, I was just in Lourdes last summer, and there is discussion. Well, Bernadette thought that the 6th decade could be for the souls in purgatory. And that is true. But early on, the tradition in Lourdes was a 6th decade, because Mary is depicted of the statue with a 6th decade. Has been additional prayers. So it's either, was it for the poor souls, or is it for vocations? It's not clear. But I brought forth and said, when you pray the Rosary, can you say a 6th decade for vocations? And I know that prayer has been very crucial, along with the fact that Father Atriste in our seminary, Father Barnett, Father Murphy, and then the seminaries that we send our men here, Mount Angel, St. Patrick's, and St. Francis in Milwaukee. The importance of praying for vocations, encouraging vocations, making sure that seminaries are solid places, a clarity in mission. As bishop, I was asked by a priest who, I was rector of the 1 year at St. Patrick's, he was just coming off pastoral year, and he goes, what are your priorities, Bishop, I understand, are salvation, education, vocation. Now, they're all connected. He goes, do you think most of your priests know that those are your priorities? And I said, yes, and involved lay people know that. He goes, I wish my bishop had that clarity, because I'm not too sure what he really believes are the priorities of the diocese. One of the cardinal, I think it was O'Brien, said, men will give their life to a mystery, but not to a question mark. And that is very true. So I think, ultimately, the church was founded by Jesus Christ for the salvation of souls. All that we do in ministry of the church, from parishes, education, hospitals, to social services, all, the why behind it is the salvation of souls. Now, you can't talk about Jesus when people are starving. They won't necessarily focus. You can't talk about Jesus when they are ill and in pain. That's why we do what we do, a response to the gospel. So my experience has been, we've been blessed with vocations. I'm very grateful to God. Vocations are like the raising of money. I can ask people to give to something, but it's their money, and they have to say yes or no. The vocation, I can speak about it, but it comes from God, and the individual has to say yes or no. I was asking, looking back at my priest, the only two regrets I've ever had in my years, the first is not always keeping in contact with people who were very helpful to me and important in my life over the period of time, just because you get busy and you get moved, especially being moved on. I regret that. I haven't always been as good about that. The second regret is not so much me, it's when I look, in this case, of a young man who maybe has the signs of a vocation, has spoken about it, is open to it, but either is fearful and never even at least tries the seminary, or his family opposes it. And so vocations, a bishop must support that. The Mass, the sixth thing. The Mass, the central act of worship, the source and summit, the body and blood, soul and divinity of Christ. The Mass must be seen as the heart of the life of the Catholic Christian. That's why the Eucharistic Congress was so important. It brought us back to focus on the great gift that Jesus has given to us. You probably have family members who don't go to church every week. And in the diocese, when people write and they either give their gift, they don't have to give their gift necessarily for the ACA, which is our annual Catholic appeal, but they're given an opportunity to write a petition. And I get the petitions. I don't get the checks. The development office gets that, and I get a report on it. But I felt that those intentions gave me, that was my own synodality consultation. It told me what's on the hearts of the faithful in Eastern Washington, both in English and in Spanish. And what is it? That relatives will come back to the faith, that their children will have their grandchildren baptized, that I will be able to forgive people who've hurt me, that I will be able to live my faith in a way that I love this one petition. I pray that I will live my faith so that my children will see me as a good husband and father and a good Catholic. And you know, 4 children who are in the age of like under 12. Or I pray that I can find work, or that I can deal with this illness. On and on and on. These petitions that are written. But I place them in a basket in my chapel, and I read each one. They're clipped together, and I won't put them in the basket until I've read it. But I say that, you know, people talk about how much the Mass is meant to be. Bishop, do not let the government ever take the Mass away from us again like they did in COVID. And again, we didn't know what that would lead to, but I now know I will never let that. When you allow the pot shops and all those other places to be open, but we were told, especially in the state of Washington, I said Oregon was no better. In fact, we really were blessed geographically because of being close to Idaho. And I used to say that to Seattle. Well, the people in Idaho are opening up, and they've asked us to keep our people home because they want to serve their people. And I said, so we're opening up. But the Mass, the central act of our faith, and Eucharistic adoration. Interesting how sometimes the Mass, in certain places, in certain cultures, and certain religious orders and dioceses, it's almost as if it's a bad game show. You know, you get is it your birthday? You know, okay. And no, this is not what the Mass is about. It's not your way to crack a bad joke and have people give a fake laugh. And you're not there to be entertained. But the Mass should have music that's beautiful. You shouldn't be either cold or too hot in the building. Hopefully it's a message that you can relate to. And you don't hold people hostage there, you know, being trapped at a Mass because the pastor or the priest or the bishop can't land the homily. Just when you think it's about going, he pulls back up again with about 600 points. And but the Mass needs to be treated. And sometimes I've looked at usually to me it's been certain religious priests. I don't know how they were trained regarding the sacraments. And preaching. The Mass is not your little play toy. I had to tell this to a provincial once I was about to discipline a religious sort of priest. I said, this is not his little 1-hour bad talk show or game show. It is the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Remind me when I was a chaplain at a high school, I was at a meeting of chaplains an ex-seminarian described the Mass as reverent theater. And I said, reverent theater is the holy sacrifice of the Mass. You see that, if that's the way you view it, no wonder you're going to change the words of institution. You're going to do this and that. All of that said, sometimes you go to little rural parishes, they don't have much in the talent of music, the people believe. Okay, so then a guy comes in and he wants to create a basilica in a small church that looked like it came out of the Sears catalog, and no. But the Mass is very important, and the bishop has to make sure that the liturgy is seen as sacred and as important. The other thing, the eighth point about leadership, is the bishop has to be vocal in the public square. Now, remember, we talk about freedom of speech, we have freedom of religion, freedom of worship. Be very careful when people, especially on the progressive left side, start talking, oh, no, we, of course, believe in freedom of worship. No, we're talking about freedom of religion. You know that great Norman Rockwell of the four things, freedom from fear, freedom of, one of them, of course, freedom of religion, faith, the ability. And so I have found most of the troubles I deal with as bishop are internal of the church. It's either someone's doing something they shouldn't do, and you're monitoring it. But sometimes it's outside the church. And in the state of Washington, we had the Attorney General threatening, he wanted to subpoena all the records. The beauty of being in a diocese when I came, the first 2 years of my time as bishop, we were in bankruptcy. But in bankruptcy, everything was turned over. So he comes knocking on the door and he wants, from Seattle and Yakima, our records. So they prepared a statement for me, and it said, I welcome this. And I said, no, I don't welcome this. I'll cooperate with this. He's the Attorney General. But I said, I want this. I want to see if he is going to exercise the same scrutiny of other institutions that deal with young people, namely the public schools. The attorney for the diocese, a great man, said, Bishop, this is not a legal opinion, but do you really want to say this? I said, yes, I really want to say it. Because I said, I don't see the scrutiny that you go after places you think you can get money from, and fortunately the courts, as you know, ruled against it, and it ended. But then we had a couple of years ago the seal of confession. And then it was, well, maybe we could do this, and maybe, I said, no, I said to there's no maybe. The seal is sacred, and we're not going to violate that. And they backed away from that. But I thought there's no compromising on that. And so then, of course, there was this movement, well, maybe the bishops need to speak out against natural gas. No. That's how the people in the mountains of eastern Washington heat their homes. Well, maybe we need to tear down the dams. So when you tear down the dams for the salmon, you're not going to have electricity. And how are you going to have electric cars in Seattle when the dams in Spokane diocese are torn down? So, you have to navigate what it is that we're going to speak on. But we cannot be afraid to speak on issues. If you remember right, the Northwest had, a tradition of anti-Catholicism. That's a direct contrast to California. That's become new. But there was a great lawsuit, famous lawsuit, Pierce versus the Society of Sisters, which is Pierce was, I think, a state senator or whatever it was, against the Holy Name Sisters, which said, essentially it was the Know Nothing Party, which was against the Catholic Church. Had links, of course, in the previous, there were Ku Klux Klan here in Oregon, that all students had to be educated in state schools. So we had a history here of anti-Catholicism. So the church has to be very clear when we fight and speak about these issues. So the bishop has to be, but he cannot be speaking, obviously, on every single issue out there. Bishop, you need to speak on this. No, I'm not going to speak on that. Do you remember the case a few years ago when it was the boys from Covington Catholic? They were in Washington, D.C. at the Walk for Life, and they came out against this kid from Covington Catholic, the boy, because he had the MAGA hat on, and it was the Native American cheering, and everybody jumped on this bandwagon to denounce him. Well, they got themselves sued. Now, something locally in the state of Washington, someone working for the church issued a statement that was ill-informed and inaccurate and wrong, but it managed to escape. When questioned, denied it, but it was seen. Okay, I don't have to issue a statement on all sorts of things, but there's certain things we can't back down on. And I think a bishop has to be very clear on that. There's two final things to make to round out the 10 points. I think an effective leader, a strong leadership of the church, a bishop, priest, needs to work with lay people and say to you, can you be Christ to the world? When I was named bishop, Archbishop Niederauer went to see him, who was a great, great man. And he said to me, gave me some advice. And he said, first of all, Tom, remember, only one of the bishops, the apostles, the first bishops, as you know, only one died a natural death, John. The rest were all martyred. So it's going to be very difficult. Just know that. The second thing he said is, God will always put in your life, especially when you become your own diocesan bishop, priests, maybe just a handful, who will support you in your mission and help you do what you have to do. The second, he will have lay people who have skill sets and competencies and education and gifts that you don't have. And you need to respect that, thank them for that, and ask them to help you do what you're doing. So I think a good bishop empowers people, he invites people, he finds ways to see, can you share your gifts, your talents, your leadership in the service of Christ and his church. Very, very important. And then the final thing is I think an effective leader, bishop, pastor has to have a great relationship, a close relationship with our Blessed Mother. Because remember, Mary leads us ever closer to her son Jesus. And you think about that. If the first miracle, you might think, humanly speaking, if you want to make a big impact, you get Jesus to raise the dead, or cure someone who is blind, or give someone speech, or the ability to hear, or stop a storm. No, it comes with a simple request from his mother to help a young family, a young couple, be saved from embarrassment at their wedding reception. That's really what the miracle of water into wine is. That miracle occurred in the most humble of settings that you especially can relate to. Think about how weddings, I couldn't do a wedding of family I've known very well. And I said, well, how was it? He said, I think my son has lost his mind. He's parroting everything coming from his fiancée and her family. And I said, well, you will have your day when it's your daughters to be married. But I said, in all said and done, the focus has to be, as you know, better than I, on the marriage and not the wedding. Now, there's always this desire to have it, a special day. One like the time I did a wedding, my first double priesthood, the photographer never showed up. He shows up, he was an hour late, and it was over, the ceremony. He was there with the reception and all that, but back to Mary, the role that Mary plays. Mary as intercessor. Mary as the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Mary, the great in Lourdes, when Mary is speaking to Bernadette, and there are these voices, you can see, you read this in the life of Bernadette. There are these voices, get out, leave us. There's whispering. And Mary doesn't say a word, she just looks. Of course, it's the devil, it's the demons. Leave us. What are you doing here? And she just looks. So I think as a bishop, I know one of the reasons why in my coat of arms I chose that is because of the miraculous medal and the rosary, but especially the miraculous medal. So I was there with some seminarians and lay people in the summertime in July in Lourdes, and we went to the Rue de Bac, the mother. Who's been to the Rue de Bac? The Rue de Bac is the mother house of the Daughters of Charity, St. Vincent de Paul, 140 Rue de Bac in Paris. It's right near the big department store. And here it is, you go inside, and there are the daughters. And there's an American, actually Sister Julie, who taught at St. Rose in Alfreda when the Daughters of Charity were in the school in Alfreda, Washington. And she's one of the assistants to the Mother General for the English speaking. But what is it just, I asked the seminary, I said, what was it that struck you? He goes, I thought Lourdes, and I said, we really liked the Rue de Bac, the chapel of the miraculous medal, the mother house. Kneeling at the altar, as Mary said, all who kneel at my son's altar, who dare to ask, or ask in full confidence, will receive the graces. So the statue of Mary with the gold rays, when she asked Catherine Labouré, the young daughter of Charity, what are those? Those are the graces that God gives to those who ask. But what are the gray? Those are the graces God wants to give, but people don't ask for it. So I bring this into just the importance of the role of the Blessed Mother in all of our lives, the intercessor. Our country is consecrated to the Immaculate Conception. And I ask that together we pray for Mary's intercession, especially as we approach a national election, and for your own family lives, and for the life of the church. And because it is Mary who will always lead us to her Son, Jesus. Amen. Amen.